All right. Hello. My name is Leslie Roth. I'm a member of the May 30th Alliance. The May 30th Alliance is a direct action organization located in Rockford, Illinois, dedicated to the struggle to end police terrorism, mass incarceration, and racial injustice in Winnebago County. The May 30th Alliance began the occupation of the City Hall in Rockford, Illinois on October 3rd, 2020, after on October 2nd, 2020, a year ago to this date, Tyris Jones, an unarmed black man, was shot while running away from the Rockford Police Department. Our occupation of the City Hall in Rockford, Illinois continued through the end of November when Officer Dominic McNeese, who had attempted to murder Tyris Jones, will be found to be justified in his attempted murder of Tyris Jones and will be sent back out onto the streets of Rockford, Illinois to endanger the communities of this city, to endanger people of this community. Our occupation of the City Hall will continue through January 5th, 2021, when Denzel Duvant, another unarmed black man, will be assaulted while he was handcuffed by multiple police officers in the Rockford Police Department. This assault would involve Officer Dominic McNeese, who had just months prior been found justified in his attempted murder of Tyris Jones. There will be no internal investigation into the assault of Denzel Duvant, and there will be no reprimand or discipline for the officers involved in that assault. Our occupation of the City Hall in Rockford, Illinois will continue through April 10th, 2021, when Faustin Guaitigo will be murdered inside of his home by Winnebago County Sheriff Deputy Joseph Brulard. Our occupation of the City Hall in Rockford, Illinois will continue when no more than 24 hours later, Jose Gonzalez Jr. will be shot while running away by Rockford Police Department Officer Owen McGinnis. Our occupation will continue through April 25th, 2021, when a high-speed pursuit would take place on the streets of Rockford, Illinois, a high-speed pursuit initiated by the Rockford Police Department that would lead to the death of Raymond Jackson after the car being chased by the Rockford Police Department would collide with Raymond Jackson, killing Raymond Jackson and critically injuring the two children that were in the car with Raymond Jackson. Our occupation of the City Hall in Rockford, Illinois will continue through August when the murder of Faustin Guaitigo will be ruled justified by the Winnebago County State's Attorney and by the Winnebago Boone Integrity Task Force. And Officer Joseph Brulard would return to endanger members of this community, members of this county. Our occupation of the City Hall in Rockford, Illinois will continue through September 2021 when the shooting of Jose Gonzalez Jr. would be found to be justified by the Winnebago County State's Attorney and by the Winnebago Boone Integrity Task Force. And Officer Owen McGinnis would return to endanger members of this community. We sit here on October 2nd, 2021, in anticipation of a justified finding coming back into the investigation of the high-speed pursuit that led to the death of Raymond Jackson. And so we want to say justice for Raymond Jackson, justice for Tyris Jones, justice for Jose Gonzalez, justice for Faustin Guaitigo, and justice for Denzel Duvant, with the realization that there may be some people who have understanding and empathy for Tyris Jones or for Denzel Duvant or for Faustin Guaitigo, but don't have it for Jose Gonzalez Jr. or don't have it for Raymond Jackson or vice versa. And it becomes our responsibility and duty at the point in which people have understanding and empathy to extrapolate out how each and every one of these cases of police terrorism, mass incarceration, and racial injustice directly and indirectly affects and is connected to every other case of police terrorism, mass incarceration, and racial injustice, and how each one of us as community members are directly and indirectly affected by police terrorism, mass incarceration, and racial injustice. Okay, today is October 2nd, 2021. It has been a year since Tyris Jones was shot while running away by the Rockford Police Department. Just in general, it's been a year since Tyris Jones was shot by the Rockford Police Department. We're coming up on a year of being of occupying the City Hall outside of Rockford, Illinois. We were because of the weather situation. We were in a place where we were trying to figure out what exactly to do to commemorate. I don't know. Commemorate isn't really the right word, but to bring attention to the fact that it's been 1 year since Tyris Jones has been shot or was shot by Rockford Police Department officer Dominic McNeese. With As it got closer and closer to this day, the weather seemed to be real rough for the day. One of the things that we had considered doing is going out to the area in which Tyris Jones was shot. With the weather looking how it began to look, it didn't seem as if that would be something that would be doable or something that would be feasible. And then also, and this has been the case with multiple events. Good evening. How you doing? Have a good night. Thank you. This has been the case with multiple events that happen sort of like around other things going on. So yesterday was the 10-year marked 10 years since little Mike Sago had been murdered by the Rockford Police. By Winnebago County Sheriff Deputy Frank Pobjecki. And then tomorrow marks 1 year since we've been out here for the occupation at City Hall. And as we were trying to get together a weekend of events, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, it also marks this weekend is the Rockford Area's Rockford Area Art Council. What's the name of this shit? Art scene. And I think we just sort of wore ourselves a little too thin, and we didn't get into a place of having an event specific for the day set out. And again, these are things that we're trying to get organizationally better at doing and having things set out. We got into a place where we understand it's not about how many people come out or what type of coverage an event gets. It's about building the practice of doing the events, building the practice of making people aware when these dates come up. And so it was not because of worrying about people or news or anything like that that kept us from doing it. It was mainly because of the weather and because of the fact of the multitude of things that was going on at this time. And so we'll have an event tomorrow at 3 o'clock to mark the 1 year being outside of City Hall. And just as much as City Hall, the occupation of City Hall has grown and evolved to encapsulate every person who has been a victim of these issues and to encapsulate all these issues, police terrorism, mass incarceration, and racial injustice. It is still very much about the shooting of Tyris Jones and marking Tyris Jones. The shooting of Tyris Jones was the first act of police violence or in custody shooting. I don't know if police violence is the right word because people have been assaulted by the police since George Floyd had been murdered. But Tyris Jones was the first person to have deadly force used on him since the George Floyd had been murdered in Minneapolis. And we had went through a spring and a summer of people being active in the streets, of people coming out to marches. And I think one of the things that was the most disheartening about the shooting of Tyris Jones was that was the lack of bodies in the streets, was the lack of people being involved. There's countless people, hundreds of people that I had interactions with through the spring and through the summer when it was almost a fad to be involved with some of these protests and demonstrations because of what was going on nationally, whose faces I never seen after Tyris Jones was shot, whose voices I never heard again after Tyris Jones was shot, who never were active after Tyris Jones was shot. And at the time, one of the things that it felt as if maybe it was something that was specific about Tyris that was keeping people out or keeping people from coming out, and or specific about the incident involving Tyris. One of the things that the police department, one of the forms of subterfuge that they used at the very beginning was perpetrating this lie that Tyris had a gun or that Tyris was attempting to rob a car or steal a car. And as always happens with these stories, is the first headline that comes out, that will be the headline that for a certain percentage of people will be the permanent headline forever. And so I think that led to some of the lethargy that was involved in the community. But as we look at this whole year in full, Tyris Jones would be joined by Denzel Duvant, who would be assaulted and beat, and there would not be anywhere near the type of response that it should have been for Denzel Duvant's assault. Jose Gonzalez Jr. would be shot. There would be nowhere near the type of response that it should be from him being shot. Faustin Guaitigo would be murdered. There would be nowhere near the amount of response that it would be from Faustin Guaitigo being murdered. And some of that falls upon it's a bunch of different things that contribute to all of that, but a percentage of it does fall upon us as community members, does fall upon us as individuals to become more involved in some of these things, to become more aware about some of these things, and to take more of an onus on taking the desire for justice, into our own hands. One of the things that has happened regularly is that we have people who prognosticate on social media and who make these posts on Facebook and who talk behind closed doors, but they never walk those actions. They do a lot of talking of those actions, but they never walk those actions. And that, to me, that's again one of the things that we have to do the job of building the understanding that it's not just enough to prognosticate online about these issues. It's not just enough to post online about these issues or to talk inside of our homes about these issues, even though that is something that we have to do as well. We have to get to a place where we are becoming active in the streets around these issues, where we are becoming active in person and in real life and in 3D around these issues. And again, that falls on us. That falls on us individually. That falls on us collectively. Society, the community. There's nobody that is not at fault in some type of a way. And when I say fault, I don't mean that. I don't mean that in a negative sense. I just more mean that in the sense of that we have to look back on things that have happened in the past and learn from those things. I think one of the main things that we have to learn from is the fact that Tyris Jones, the shooting of Tyris Jones took place and occurred, and there were people who, because of stories that came out around Tyris Jones and about Tyris Jones, felt the need or felt that they shouldn't be involved, or felt that maybe Tyris Jones was not deserving of justice because of those things. And I had cautioned people at the time. I tried to, as often as I could, in speeches and in some of the rhetoric that I had, to caution people at the time that just because you may feel as if Tyris Jones is not deserving of justice, which I don't believe is true. I believe every human being, every person is deserving of justice. Do not allow that to cloud the fact that Tyris Jones was not shot because he was undeserving of justice, or Tyris Jones was not shot because of actions or decisions that he had made in his past, or because of what his character was. Tyris Jones was shot because he was a black man in Rockford, Illinois. For anybody who did not believe that at that time, or anybody who may not have wanted to hear that at that time, I think that became fully manifested on January 5th, 2021, when Denzel Duvant would be mercilessly beat. And one of the officers involved in Denzel Duvant being beat would be Dominic McNeese, the officer who had just shot Tyris Jones earlier. And I've often said to people that I would like, how do you have the conversation with the mother of Denzel Duvant and say, because of the fact that we did not feel that Tyris Jones was deserving of justice, because of the fact that we did not believe that Tyris Jones' character deserved for us to struggle for him, our lethargy and our lack of action around that allow for them to justify it, or enable for the police department and the state's attorney to justify the shooting of Tyris Jones and to put that officer back onto the streets, and then that officer would then assault your child and then would then beat your child. And I think that we have to really take a look at the statement that what is done to the least of us is done to all of us. And I think that is, and again, that is not to say that Tyris Jones is the least of us. That is not to say anybody is the least of us. But for the people who buy into that mentality, the response being what happens to the least of us happens to all of us, is because the people who are the most vulnerable in our society are the people who we have to protect the most. And when we don't allow ourselves to protect them the most, what happens is that these issues begin to manifest themselves on other people who we may believe are more deserving of justice or more deserving of a reaction or a response. But by the time you get to that person, you've already built in that lethargy. You've already given these power structures the type of cushion and comfort that they need to not respond. To not do anything about their officers enacting or engaging in these type of violent actions. And so the lethargy that was and the lack of action that was around the shooting of Tyris Jones perpetuated and led to the assault of Denzel Duvine. And then the lack of action that was around Denzel Duvine and the lack of response around Denzel Duvine perpetuated and built a climate for us to get to April 10th and April 11th, where in a 48-hour period, two different law enforcement agencies in this city would shoot two different people. And then a week after that shooting of those two people, when we would march on the streets, we would have 50 people. 50 people willing to march on the streets. And then the same thing after on this, if we trace back to this day a year ago, outside of District 1, there was 20, 25, maybe 25 at most, 25 at most people that was outside of District 1 on October 2nd, 2020, after Tyris Jones was shot. And when you think back that just on May 30th, just 4 or 5 months earlier, there were over 1,000 people outside of District 1, and no one in this city had been shot. No one in this area, in this county, had been shot. These issues had not manifested themselves onto anybody in this area, but because of what had happened states over, you've seen the response from members of this community, which means that, to me, in my opinion, that means that there's a capacity for that type of response here in this city. There's a capacity for that type of response in the county, but we have not got into the political consciousness or the political awareness to manifest that capacity when it happens to somebody in our own city, when it happens to somebody in our own county, when it happens to somebody in our own backyard. We're still playing follow the leader to national stories. And I think that there's no way for us to eradicate these local issues and to get justice for these local victims as long as we are playing follow the leader to stories of national impotence. And so those are some of the my direct reflections and some of my direct thoughts on the shooting of Tyris Jones a year afterwards, on the response to the shooting of Tyris Jones a year afterwards. Or the lack of response on the shooting of Tyris Jones a year afterwards. And I think that what has, and it was one of the reasons that we did come out here. And I want to pivot to a few other things as well as we speak here. But because of the fact that we understood when we came out here that Tyris Jones would not happen in a vacuum, that they would not shoot Tyris Jones and then for the next 5 years nobody get shot, nobody be assaulted, nobody have these issues manifest themselves on them as well. We understood that these things would happen again. And so we stayed out here with the understanding that if Tyris Jones is not enough to call for change, if Tyris Jones is not enough, is not the straw that breaks the camel's back, then what we will begin to do is we will begin to keep track of all the straws that are on the back of this camel. We will begin to keep track of all these receipts, of all these things that have happened, not only had happened in the past, but what happened in the future and what happened in the present. And so by doing that, we decided to stay outside of City Hall. We decided to continue the occupation. We decided that the best place to raise awareness to this issue, to try to change the consciousness of this community in this city, the best place to do that was outside. The best place to do that was in person, was face-to-face. And so once Denzel Duvine was assaulted and Faustin Guaitigo was murdered and Jose Gonzalez Jr. shot, and then the high-speed pursuit that led to the death of Raymond Jackson, once each one of these things began to happen in the same cycle of criminalizing the victim and then justifying the officer's murder or the officer's actions, as those cycles continue to happen, each one of these events became linked to each other. There is no telling the story of Tyris Jones now without telling the story of Denzel Duvant, because of the fact that the officer that shot Tyris Jones assaulted Denzel Duvant. There's no telling the story of Denzel Duvant now without telling the story of Faustin Guaitigo and Jose Gonzalez Jr. There's no telling the story of Faustin Guaitigo without telling the story of Jose Gonzalez Jr. And then there's no telling their story without telling the story of Raymond Jackson. And I believe that there's a way there's a way possible that you could not tell each one of these stories when speaking about them, that they could become just individual events. But it has been the work that we have done here and the work that members of the community as well have done, and other activists and other organizations have done, to make a understanding how all of these things are linked and how we cannot allow for these stories to be told without the other ones. And that also has led to why we have why we have these 15 memorials outside of downtown Rockford, Illinois, in the area that we call Say Their Name Square, because there's no way to tell the story of because we have arrived to a place where you can no longer tell the story of Kerry Blake or Logan Bell or Mark Barmore, Demetrius Bennett, or Little Mike Sago, or Mikey Guzman, or Jovan Fresco, or Joseph McCormick, or Shannon Graves, without telling the story of Tyris Jones, without telling the story of Denzel Duvant, without telling the story of Jose Gonzalez Jr., Faustin Guaitigo, and Raymond Jackson, and Joy Lambert, and Todd Benberger, and all of these people who have become victims of the issues of police terrorism, mass incarceration, and racial injustice. And I believe that as we have done the job of connecting these dots and connecting these pieces and putting this puzzle together, we have shown people just how wide this issue is. And I've learned myself, and I've been educated myself on just how wide ranging this issue is. And so I think in a lot of respects, when we do get to a place where we have, as we continue to get to a place, because we are in the process of getting to that place now. We're taking steps to get to that place now. As we get to that place, there will have to be a changing of the overall context that the story of the shooting of Tyris Jones is told in. There will have to be a changing in the overall context. Hello. Hey. No, you're fine. Thank you for your work. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. It means a lot. Thank you very much. 1 year, not a couple years yet. It feels like a couple years. It'll be 1 year tomorrow. 1 year tomorrow. We came out here. A young man got shot this day a year ago. So we came out here then, and we've been out here ever since. Thank you. I appreciate that.
I just bought a shirt tonight. Get in good trouble.
That's my motto. That's my motto.
Amen.
Have a good night. Thank you. And so as these things have progressed and has evolved, I think that that the context of these events has evolved as well. I don't know if the context is the right thing I'm trying to say. I sort of lost my train of thought, but that's a good losing of a train of thought. I think one of the other things that has happened is, and maybe this is a conversation that's better fit for tomorrow. Jesus, I'll keep this change dropping out of my pocket. If Tyris Jones would have been shot maybe a week after he was shot, or 2 weeks after he was shot, or a month after he was shot, or 2 months after he was shot, there's a very strong argument to be made that we wouldn't have came to the city hall outside of Rockford, Illinois. That we wouldn't have had this same type of reaction organizationally or even individually, some of us. But the reason that we had such an immediate response and immediate reaction, and the reason we were so willing to go this far, to take these things this far, was because just a week earlier we had finished the last city market. And finishing the last city market, we've seen these police officers falsely arrest people. We've seen these police officers assault people unjustly. And so we were only 7 days removed from these issues of police terrorism, mass incarceration, and racial injustice manifesting themselves on us personally. And so I've never, I mean, I like the idea that everything happens for a reason is a very good idea, you know, in concept. And I'm not here to fight over the idea that everything happens for a reason. But I do believe that we must give purpose to everything that happens to survive. And we were in a position because of the timing in which Tyris Jones was shot to give purpose to Tyris Jones being shot, to give purpose for Tyris Jones, to give purpose for Tyris Jones being shot. Sorry, that was somebody. I should clarify. Somebody sent a message. That's why I chuckle like that. I'm sorry. This is bad timing. We were in a position to give purpose to Tyris Jones being shot by coming out to the city hall and remaining at the city hall, by not allowing business as usual to continue in the city of Rockford, Illinois. And there will have to be, again, an honest conversation about the family of Tyris Jones and the loved ones of Tyris Jones and the sacrifice and the struggle that each of them have had to have, and the sacrifice and the struggle that Tyris Jones himself has had to have, and what that sacrifice has meant to this struggle, and what that sacrifice will mean to this struggle going forward, and what that sacrifice means in context of everybody else who have been victims of these issues. I think that the strength that Tyris Jones's family, and again, Tyris Jones as well, have displayed and have had in this year since he's been shot has been amazing, and has been very admirable, and I've gained strength from them. I know that other people who have been involved in the occupation from the beginning, whether they were involved at the beginning, involved in the middle, involved currently, I know that they've gained strength as well from the strength that has been put on display by the family and the loved ones of Tyris Jones and by Tyris Jones. And so I really wanted to take the time out to do this live, to speak about why there was not an event, to speak about the significance of the shooting of Tyris Jones, to speak about the significance of Tyris Jones's struggle, to speak about the significance of the struggle of the family of Tyris Jones, and to speak about where the story of Tyris Jones fits in with the story of police terrorism, mass incarceration, and racial injustice in Winnebago County. And I believe it is a piece that cannot be removed. You cannot tell the story of the struggle to end police terrorism, mass incarceration, and racial injustice in this city, in this county, without telling the story of Tyris Jones and the story of the family of Tyris Jones. And I think that for better or worse, one of the other things that also came with the shooting of Tyris Jones is us as a community, me individually, us organizationally, addressing what part institutional racism and institutional evils play in inter-community violence, in black-on-black violence, in street violence. I think that it was one of the things that was very difficult to articulate at the beginning of the occupation, but has become simpler for me to articulate. The issue has not become simpler, but it has become simpler for me to articulate how I don't know in the gun factories that are created and that are ran by black Americans and by the descendants of slaves. I don't know the place where you can find coca leaves and opium plants, opioid plants. I don't know if I'm saying this right. Where black people run these things, and the descendants of slaves are in control of these things. And the same thing. If you look back onto street gangs in general and the originated where these gangs were created from, and you look back and you see the ways that police departments and governments have used corrupt actions to infiltrate gangs and play gangs against each other. And this is what Rockford is. We have to have when we're speaking about these things, we have to have an honest conversation about Rockford. We have to have an honest conversation about our environment and in the society we live in, and we have to understand that there are people, and particularly government and private institutions that are ran by rich white men who profit off of teenagers in the streets shooting at each other and killing each other and selling drugs to in the community, and profit off of all of the things that would be called crime. There is a big business around continuing those things and continuing the status quo around those things. And that is part of what leads to the police terrorism and mass incarceration and racial injustice issues that we are speaking about. And so we cannot allow ourselves to scapegoat individuals, to allow individuals to become scapegoats for institutional problems. And to me, that is one of the other things that was brought to the forefront with the shooting of Tyris Jones, is that a lot of people wanted to use Tyris Jones as an individual scapegoat for institutional problems. And that will only get us to a place where we continue to have the institutional problems and continue to have new individuals as scapegoats. And so we have to look at the people who have been in political positions of power, institutional positions of power in this city, who have perpetuated violence, who have perpetuated poverty, perpetuated racism, perpetuated misogyny, and all of these things that lead to us having the type of environment that we have in this city. And that environment is what molds these children, molds these teenagers. Is constantly there. I grew up in this city. I know that for a fact. And so I just want to, again, tomorrow, depending on what the weather is like, we'll be outside no matter what. No matter what it's like, we'll be outside at 3 o'clock. Depending on what the weather is like, come out if the weather permits you to. If the weather doesn't permit you to, it's understood. But we do have to get to a place where weather does not dictate our actions. We dictate our actions. But I'm under no false assumption that we are at that place now, or we will be at that place tomorrow. So I want to say that for anybody who is not unaware, the plan is to continue the occupation past the 1 year mark. That was a thing that for a while we sort of talked about getting to 1 year and leaving after 1 year. And as we've got into 1 year, it has become painfully undeniable that 1 year is not enough. And so we will continue the occupation indefinitely. And we'll be back tomorrow. And next week I'm going to begin to try to do these lives more often. We got a couple different segments we want to start throwing in. We just want to get into a place of having some content released every day. So just be patient with us as we get to that place. And we're still learning and growing and evolving as an organization and as a collective and as individuals from all the things that are going on. So we want to say justice for Demetrius Bennett, justice for Kerry Blake, justice for Logan Bell, justice for Geno Washington, justice for Mark Barmore, justice for Jovan Fresco, justice for Suzette Babler, justice for Jasper Banks, justice for Philip Johnson, justice for Faustin Guaitigo, justice for Shannon Graves, justice for Lil Mike Sago, justice for Mikey Guzman, justice for Joseph McCormick, justice for Eddie Patterson. We want to take the time out to say justice for Tyris Jones, and send a special thoughts, prayers, and our love is with the family of Tyris Jones and with Tyris Jones. Stay strong. Keep your head up. We outside.